"Your medal means nothing here," the judge declared, staring down at the decorated Vietnam veteran. The old man lowered his head in shame, fingers fumbling with his Purple Heart. Then the sound echoed through the courthouse. Military boots, synchronized, powerful, 5 generals, 5 different branches, all walking toward that judge. Welcome to People's Journal Stories. Before we continue this emotional story, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who were never meant to be forgotten. The morning light filtering through the tall windows of courtroom 7B cast long shadows across the worn wooden benches. The air carried that institutional smell of old wood, dust, and the weight of countless decisions made within these walls. It was 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when retired Master Sergeant William Bill Crawford shuffled through the heavy oak doors, his cane tapping softly against the marble floor. At 73, Bill moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had absorbed more punishment than most could imagine. The Purple Heart pinned to his chest caught the morning light, a small splash of violet ribbon against his carefully pressed dress uniform. 3 rows of ribbons told a story most people would never read, and Bill preferred it that way. He'd been summoned here for a civil matter, a property dispute with a neighbor who claimed Bill's flagpole extended 6 inches onto his land. Ridiculous, really, but the neighbor had influential friends, and somehow this petty grievance had escalated to formal proceedings. Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom with the brisk authority of someone who'd spent 15 years behind the bench. Her black robe seemed to absorb the light as she settled into her chair, not bothering to look up from the file in front of her. At 52, she'd built her reputation on efficiency and a no-nonsense approach that some called fair, others called cold. "Case number 2024, CV1847, she announced without ceremony. Plaintiff Harrison versus Defendant Crawford, property boundary dispute." Bill rose slowly from his seat, the movement accompanied by the soft protest of joints that had been broken and mended more times than he cared to count. His attorney, a young public defender named Sarah Chen, stood beside him with the nervous energy of someone handling her first case involving a veteran. Judge Morrison finally looked up, her gaze immediately fixing on Bill's uniform. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around her eyes that suggested irritation rather than respect. "Mr. Crawford," she began, her voice carrying across the nearly empty courtroom. "This is a civil proceeding, not a military parade. I'll need you to remove that medal before we continue." The words landed like a physical blow. Bill's weathered hand moved instinctively to the Purple Heart, his fingers tracing the familiar outline. Around him, the handful of observers, courthouse staff, a few curious retirees who attended proceedings for entertainment, shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor," Sarah Chen ventured quietly, "Mr. Crawford has every right to wear his decorations." "Ms. Chen," Judge Morrison cut her off sharply, "this courtroom operates under my authority, not military protocol. The medal is a distraction and inappropriate for these proceedings." Bill stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the judge's shoulder. In his mind, he was back in the rice paddies outside Da Nang, 1968, dragging his wounded radio operator through knee-deep water while mortar rounds exploded around them. The Purple Heart wasn't just a decoration. It was a promise made in blood, a recognition of sacrifice that had cost him everything and given him purpose. "Mr. Crawford," Judge Morrison's voice sharpened, "I'm waiting." The courtroom held its breath. Bill's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the medal's clasp. The shame wasn't in the removing. It was in the dismissal, the casual disregard for what the purple ribbon represented. He'd worn this medal to his daughter's wedding, to his wife's funeral, to moments when he needed to remember who he'd been and what he'd endured. "Your Honor," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, "this medal represents—" "Mr. Crawford," Judge Morrison interrupted, her patience clearly exhausted. "This is your final warning. Remove the medal or I'll hold you in contempt of court." As Bill's fingers worked at the medal's clasp, a sound began to intrude on the courtroom's tense atmosphere. At first, it was barely noticeable, a rhythmic cadence that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the building. Then it grew stronger, more distinct. The sound of military boots, multiple pairs, moving in formation. Judge Morrison paused, her head tilting slightly as the sound grew louder. The courthouse clerk, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson who'd worked these halls for 30 years, looked up from her paperwork with confusion. She'd never heard anything quite like this in all her years here. The footsteps weren't rushing, they were measured, deliberate, carrying the unmistakable rhythm of soldiers who'd marched together through hell and back. The sound echoed off the marble floors and high ceilings, growing stronger with each passing second. Judge Morrison's expression shifted from irritation to confusion to something approaching concern. "Bailiff," she called to the uniformed officer standing near the back of the room. "What's that noise?" Before the bailiff could respond, the heavy courtroom doors swung open with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. 5 men entered in formation, not walking, but marching with the precision that comes only from decades of military service. Each wore the dress uniform of a different branch: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. The stars on their shoulders gleamed under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. 5 generals. The combined weight of their authority seemed to change the very air pressure in the room. The lead figure, Army General Robert Hayes, was a man whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. At 61, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd made life and death decisions in places most people couldn't pronounce. His chest bore decorations that read, like a history of American military engagement over the past 3 decades. Behind him, Navy Admiral Catherine Vasquez moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd commanded ships in hostile waters. Air Force General Marcus Thompson's bearing spoke of a man who'd flown missions over Baghdad when the sky was full of surface-to-air missiles. Marine General David Rodriguez had the weathered look of someone who'd led troops through the mountains of Afghanistan. Coast Guard Admiral Patricia Sun carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd saved lives in storms that would terrify most people. They moved as one unit, their formation perfect, their purpose unmistakable. As they reached the center of the courtroom, they came to a halt with military precision. General Hayes stepped forward, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had once moved mountains and changed the course of battles. "Your Honor," he said, his words measured and deliberate, "we respectfully request permission to address this court." Judge Morrison's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. In 15 years on the bench, she'd dealt with angry defendants, disruptive attorneys, and emotional family members. But she'd never had 5 generals march into her courtroom in formation. This is highly irregular," she managed, her usual commanding presence noticeably shaken. "Yes, ma'am," General Hayes agreed. "It is. But so is ordering a decorated combat veteran to remove his Purple Heart in a court of law." The words seemed to echo in the suddenly silent courtroom. Mrs. Patterson had stopped typing entirely. The bailiff stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch history unfold. Admiral Vasquez stepped forward. "Your Honor, we became aware of these proceedings through channels that monitor threats to veteran dignity. What we learned compelled us to take immediate action." "Threats?" Judge Morrison's voice cracked slightly. "This is a simple property dispute." "Ma'am," General Thompson interrupted respectfully but firmly, "with all due respect, there is nothing simple about humiliating a Purple Heart recipient in public proceedings." Bill Crawford stood frozen at the defendant's table, his hand still hovering near his medal. The shame he'd felt moments before was transforming into something else, not pride exactly, but a restoration of dignity he'd thought was lost forever. General Rodriguez, the Marine, spoke next. His voice carried the gravelly tone of someone who'd spent years shouting orders over gunfire and explosions. "Master Sergeant Crawford," he said, addressing Bill directly while maintaining eye contact with the judge, served 3 tours in Vietnam. He was wounded twice, once while rescuing 4 soldiers from a burning APC, once while holding a defensive position so his unit could evacuate wounded comrades. Admiral Sun added, "The Purple Heart he wears represents bloodshed in service to this nation." "It's not a decoration, Your Honor." It's a badge of sacrifice. Judge Morrison's face had gone pale. The authority she'd wielded so casually moments before seemed to be evaporating like morning mist. Gentlemen and Admiral, I appreciate your service, but this court operates under civilian authority. Yes, ma'am, General Hayes agreed. It does. But that civilian authority exists because men like Master Sergeant Crawford bled to preserve it. The General's words carried no threat, no disrespect. They were simply stating facts with the weight of absolute truth. General Thompson reached into his jacket and produced a thick folder. Your Honor, if I may present some additional context about the man you've ordered to remove his Purple Heart. Without waiting for permission, he began reading from the folder. Master Sergeant William Crawford, enlisted 1967, first tour, 1968 to 1969, 25th Infantry Division, wounded April 15, 1969, during the rescue of Sergeant James Martinez, Corporal David Kim, Private First Class Robert Johnson, and Private Michael O'Brien from a burning armored personnel carrier hit by enemy fire. The General's voice was steady, professional, but each word seemed to hit Judge Morrison like a physical blow. Second tour, 1970 to 1971, 1st Cavalry Division, wounded August 3, 1971, while maintaining a defensive position during the evacuation of Firebase Charlie. Held position for 47 minutes against overwhelming enemy force, allowing the evacuation of 19 wounded soldiers. Admiral Vasquez continued the recitation. Awards and decorations: Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Combat Infantry Badge, Vietnam Service Medal with 4 campaign stars, Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal. Stop, Judge Morrison whispered, but her voice carried no authority. General Rodriguez stepped closer to the bench. Your Honor, this man spent 18 months in military hospitals learning to walk again after his second wound. He never complained, never asked for special treatment, never demanded recognition. He went home, worked construction for 37 years, raised 3 children, and buried his wife last year after a 50-year marriage. The courtroom was absolutely silent now, except for the soft sound of Bill Crawford's breathing. Tears had begun to track down his weathered cheeks, but he made no move to wipe them away. Admiral Sun's voice was quiet, but clear. He comes to court today wearing his Purple Heart not for show, Your Honor, but because it's Tuesday. He wears it every Tuesday, the day his wife was buried. It's his way of honoring her memory and the promises he made to come home to her. Judge Morrison's composure finally cracked completely. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, missing it on the first attempt. General Hayes stepped directly to the front of the bench. His voice remained respectful, but it carried the unmistakable tone of command. Your Honor, we're not here to challenge your authority or disrupt your proceedings. We're here because when word reached us that a Purple Heart recipient was being humiliated in a court of law, we felt compelled to remind everyone present what that medal represents. He gestured toward Bill, who still stood at attention despite his years and his wounds. That medal represents the blood of American servicemen and women. It represents sacrifice made freely, wounds accepted willingly, pain endured silently. It represents the very freedom that allows this court to exist. The General paused, letting his words sink in. Your Honor, we respectfully submit that Master Sergeant Crawford has earned the right to wear his Purple Heart anywhere he chooses, including in this courtroom. Judge Morrison sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Master Sergeant Crawford, she said, addressing Bill directly for the first time since the proceedings began, please remain as you are. I apologize for my earlier instruction. But the generals weren't finished. Admiral Vasquez stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may, there's something else this court should know about Master Sergeant Crawford's presence here today. She gestured toward Sarah Chen, Bill's young attorney, who looked as stunned as everyone else in the room. The property dispute that brought Master Sergeant Crawford here today involves a flagpole that flies the American flag every single day at 0600 hours and is lowered every evening at 1800 hours, following proper flag protocol. General Thompson continued the explanation. The neighbor who filed this complaint, Mr. Harrison, objected not just to the flagpole's alleged encroachment on his property, but to what he called unnecessary daily flag ceremonies that disturbed his morning routine. A collective gasp went up from the few observers in the courtroom. Even Mrs. Patterson looked up from her papers in shock. General Rodriguez's voice carried barely controlled anger. Master Sergeant Crawford has conducted proper flag ceremonies every day for the past 53 years. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, he honors the flag that he bled to defend. Admiral Sun added, "The so-called encroachment is exactly 2 3/4 inches, the width of the flagpole's base. Mr. Harrison is demanding that a Purple Heart recipient relocate his flagpole to avoid this minimal intrusion on property that Mr. Harrison purchased, knowing full well about the flag ceremonies." Judge Morrison's face had gone white. She looked down at the file before her as if seeing it for the first time. General Hayes stepped closer to the bench. "Your Honor, we're not here to influence your legal decision. Property law is property law. But we wanted to ensure that this court understood exactly who Master Sergeant Crawford is and what his daily flag ceremony represents." The general's voice carried across the silent courtroom. "For 53 years, this man has honored our flag every single day. For 53 years, he's remembered the friends who didn't come home. For 53 years, he's kept faith with the promises made in places where young men died so that others might live free." Admiral Vasquez's voice was quiet, but clear. "Your Honor, if the court orders Master Sergeant Crawford to move his flagpole to accommodate Mr. Harrison's complaint, that's the law. But perhaps the court might consider what it means to order a man who earned his decorations in blood to alter a ceremony that honors the flag he fought to defend." Judge Morrison sat in complete silence for nearly a full minute. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, humbled. I need a recess, 30 minutes. She rose from the bench, her black robes no longer seeming to command authority, but rather to weigh her down. As she left through her private entrance, the courtroom remained frozen in tableau. The 5 generals turned as one to face Bill Crawford. General Hayes approached him first. "Master Sergeant," he said, offering a crisp salute. Bill, despite his age and his trembling hands, returned the salute with military precision. His voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "Sirs, ma'ams, I don't understand. How did you know?" Admiral Vasquez smiled, the first warm expression anyone had shown in the courtroom that morning. "Master Sergeant, the military is a small community. When word gets out that one of our own is being disrespected, that word travels fast." General Thompson placed a gentle hand on Bill's shoulder. "We may not all have served in Vietnam, Master Sergeant, but we all serve under the same flag. An insult to your service is an insult to all of our service." Bill's attorney, Sarah Chen, finally found her voice. "Sirs, how is this possible? How did you all get here so quickly?" General Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Ma'am, when General Hayes put out the word 2 hours ago, we all happened to be in the area. Amazing coincidence. Of course, it wasn't a coincidence at all." When news of the proceedings had reached General Hayes through veteran advocacy networks, he'd made 5 phone calls. Within minutes, 4 colleagues had adjusted their schedules to make an unprecedented show of support for a man they'd never met, but whose service they honored. Admiral Sun looked around the courtroom. "Master Sergeant Crawford, we want you to know that your daily flag ceremony is known throughout the veteran community in this area. You have more people watching and honoring that flag with you each morning than you realize." When Judge Morrison returned 30 minutes later, her demeanor had changed completely. She moved slowly, deliberately, and when she spoke, her voice carried a humility that hadn't been there before. "Master Sergeant Crawford," she began, "please approach the bench." Bill walked forward slowly, his cane tapping against the marble floor. The 5 generals remained standing at the back of the courtroom, a silent honor guard. "Master Sergeant," Judge Morrison said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology. Not just for my earlier conduct, but for my ignorance of who you are and what you represent." She paused, clearly struggling with her words. "During our recess, I took the time to read your service record. I learned about your wounds, your decorations, your sacrifice. I also learned about your daily flag ceremony and what it means to your community." Judge Morrison looked directly at Bill, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Master Sergeant, in my 15 years on this bench, I have never been more wrong about anything. I ordered you to remove a medal that you earned with your blood in service to the very principles that allow this court to exist." She reached down and picked up the file containing the property dispute. "Regarding the matter of Harrison versus Crawford, this court finds that Mr. Harrison's complaint is frivolous and without merit. A 2 3/4 inch encroachment by a flagpole that honors the American flag does not constitute a significant property intrusion." The judge's voice grew stronger. "Furthermore, this court recognizes that Master Sergeant Crawford's daily flag ceremony serves the public good by honoring the sacrifices of all veterans. Mr. Harrison's complaint is dismissed with prejudice, but she wasn't finished. Master Sergeant Crawford, this court formally apologizes for the disrespect shown to you in your service today. Your Purple Heart and everything it represents is welcome in this courtroom at any time." Judge Morrison stood, and in an unprecedented gesture, she removed her judicial robes and walked around the bench to stand before Bill. "Sir," she said, offering a respectful nod that was as close to a salute as a civilian could manage, "thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice, and thank you for 53 years of honoring our flag." The courtroom erupted in applause, not just from the observers, but from the courthouse staff who had gathered in the doorway upon hearing about the unprecedented proceedings. General Hayes approached the bench. "Your Honor, if I may." Judge Morrison nodded. "Master Sergeant Crawford," the general said, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "you have served with honor, sacrificed with dignity, and continued to honor our flag for over half a century. It is our privilege to serve in the same military that you helped build." Admiral Vasquez stepped forward. "Master Sergeant, we want you to know that tomorrow morning at 0600 hours, we'll be thinking of you as you raise that flag, and every morning after that." Bill Crawford stood as straight as his wounded body would allow, tears streaming down his face. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. "Sirs, ma'ams, Your Honor, I just wanted to honor the flag. I just wanted to remember the ones who didn't come home." General Thompson's voice was gentle. "Master Sergeant, because of men like you, they're not forgotten. They never will be." As the proceedings concluded and people began to file out of the courtroom, something remarkable happened. One by one, everyone present, the courthouse staff, the observers, even the bailiff, approached Bill Crawford. Not to congratulate him or make speeches, but simply to shake his hand and say, "Thank you." Mrs. Patterson, the elderly clerk, was the last to approach. She took Bill's weathered hands in hers and spoke quietly. "Master Sergeant, I've worked in this courthouse for 30 years. I've seen a lot of people come and go, but I want you to know what happened here today, what those generals did for you. I've never seen anything like it. You should be proud." Bill's voice was thick with emotion. "Ma'am, I'm just proud to have served." As Bill Crawford walked out of the courthouse that morning, flanked by 5 generals who had rearranged their entire schedules to honor a man they'd never met, something profound had occurred. It wasn't just about a Purple Heart or a property dispute or even a flag ceremony. It was about remembering that some things are sacred, that sacrifice deserves recognition, that service demands respect, and that the symbols of our freedom are worth defending, even in a civil courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Judge Morrison watched from her chamber's window as the unlikely group walked down the courthouse steps. She made a mental note to research veteran advocacy organizations and to ensure that her staff understood the significance of military decorations. She also made a personal note to attend a flag ceremony at 0600 hours the following morning. It seemed like the least she could do. The story spread quickly through veteran communities and social media. Within days, Bill Crawford's morning flag ceremony had become a local gathering point. Veterans from across the region began showing up at 0600 hours to stand with him as he raised the flag. The neighbor who had filed the complaint, Mr. Harrison, quietly withdrew from the neighborhood 3 weeks later. He never explained his decision, but neighbors noticed that he couldn't quite meet Bill's eyes during his final days there. General Hayes later reflected on the day's events during a secure briefing with Pentagon staff. "Sometimes," he said, "the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with presence. Sometimes showing up is everything." The 5 generals never spoke publicly about their decision to converge on a small courthouse that Tuesday morning. They didn't need to. Their actions had spoken clearly enough. Bill Crawford continued his daily flag ceremony until he passed away peacefully in his sleep 4 years later, on a Tuesday morning. He was found at his kitchen table, dressed in his uniform, ready for the morning ceremony. At his funeral, 5 generals served as honorary pallbearers. The American flag that had flown over his home for 57 years was folded with military precision and presented to his daughter. And every morning at 0600 hours, veterans continued to gather at the small flagpole that caused such a fuss. They raised the flag in silence, remembering Bill Crawford and all the others who never asked for recognition, but deserved so much more. Because some things are worth fighting for, some people are worth standing up for, and some moments require 5 generals to walk into a courtroom and remind everyone what honor really means. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't shout. They whisper through the quiet dignity of those who serve without seeking recognition. Master Sergeant Bill Crawford never asked for 5 generals to come to his defense. He never demanded respect for his Purple Heart. He simply wanted to honor the flag and remember the fallen. But that's exactly why he deserved both. Have you ever met someone like Bill Crawford? Someone who served quietly, sacrificed silently, and continued to honor their oath long after their war was over? Share their story in the comments below. Let us know their name. Help us remember the ones who never asked to be remembered. From which city in the world are you watching this story today? And if you believe that stories like this need to be told, that quiet heroes deserve recognition, subscribe to People's Journal Stories. We're here to document the moments when ordinary people do extraordinary things, and extraordinary people do ordinary things with such dignity that they change the world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And the next time you see a flag ceremony, anywhere, anytime, take a moment to think of Bill Crawford and all the others who never stopped honoring the promise they made to come home. We'll see you in the next story.